Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome once again to Ancient Epics, the place where the greatest stories of humanity come back to life. Long before animated colors softened its sorrow, the tale of the Little Mermaid emerged as one of the most haunting creations of European literature, born not from whimsy, but from silence, sacrifice, and the cold vastness of the sea. Few remember that this story was never meant to comfort. Its original form carried no promise of easy happiness, no triumph crowned by marriage or song. Instead, it was shaped by an age that believed suffering refined the soul, and by a writer who understood longing as deeply as the tides understand the moon. Written in the early 19th century, when sailors still vanished into uncharted waters and the ocean remained a realm of terror as much as wonder, The Little Mermaid reflected humanity's ancient fear of the deep, a world beautiful, lethal, and forever beyond full understanding. Beneath the fairy tale surface lay echoes of older sea myths from Scandinavia, where spirits were believed to dwell below the waves, trading voices for fate, and where the sea itself was said to remember every life it claimed. Even today, marine biologists speak of sound traveling endlessly through water, while astronomers note how the moon's pull governs tides with tireless precision. In this convergence of science, myth, and grief, The Little Mermaid was born not as a children's story, but as a quiet lament from the depths, waiting patiently to be remembered. In the northern seas, where salt winds battered the rocky coasts of Denmark and the Baltic waters darkened beneath heavy skies, the ocean was never a gentle presence. It was a living force, shaping trade routes, swallowing fleets, and sustaining entire kingdoms through fishing and exploration. In these waters, legends of merfolk had circulated for centuries. Medieval maps marked dangerous currents with drawings of half-human beings, warning sailors of unseen perils. Norse sagas spoke of sea spirits who could bless voyages or doom them, while fishermen whispered of voices carried across fog-shrouded waves. These ancient beliefs did not vanish with time, they transformed. By the 19th century, they lingered in folklore, in ballads, and in the collective memory of coastal communities. Hans Christian Andersen, born in 1805 in Odense, grew up surrounded by such stories. Denmark at the time was a nation shaped by the sea, its harbors filled with merchant ships and naval vessels, its economy tied to maritime routes that stretched across Europe. Andersen himself lived during an era of scientific curiosity when naturalists studied marine life with new rigor, cataloging strange creatures brought up from the depths. The ocean was becoming known, yet it remained unknowable. This tension seeped into Andersen's imagination, blending empirical observation with mythic inheritance. The Little Mermaid first appeared in 1837, nestled among other tales that carried moral weight beneath their poetic language. Unlike older folk legends, which often promised reward for cleverness or obedience, this story focused on transformation through loss. At its heart lay a question that had echoed through ancient myths. What price must be paid to cross the boundary between worlds? From the Greek tale of Scylla, once human before becoming a sea monster, to Celtic Selkie legends of seal people who shed their skins to walk on land, humanity had long imagined beings trapped between realms. The Little Mermaid stood among them, yet differed in one crucial way. Her longing was not driven by hunger, revenge, or deception, but by a quiet desire for an immortal soul. In Andersen's vision, the underwater world was not a realm of chaos. It was structured, ancient, and bound by laws as immutable as gravity. Coral forests rose like silent cathedrals, illuminated by filtered sunlight. The sea floor stretched farther than human sight, shaped by geological forces over millions of years. Modern oceanography confirms that such underwater landscapes exist, carved by tectonic movement and erosion, forming trenches and ridges deeper than any mountain is tall. Andersen, without scientific instruments, sensed this immensity. His sea was not shallow fantasy, but an abyss echoing with age. Mermaids in this world lived long lives, measured not in decades but centuries, yet eternity alone did not grant fulfillment. According to Northern European folklore, souls were not guaranteed to all beings. Humans, bound to earth and sky, were believed to possess an immortal essence, while creatures of sea and forest returned to nature without afterlife. This belief, shaped by Christian theology and older pagan traditions, forms the quiet axis of the story. The Little Mermaid's longing was spiritual as much as emotional, reflecting a cultural anxiety of Andersen's time when faith, science, and philosophy wrestled for dominance. Above the waves, the human world glittered with danger and promise. Ships crossed the sea guided by stars that astronomers had mapped since antiquity. Polaris held steady in the northern sky, while constellations like Ursa Major guided navigation long before the compass became common. Sailors trusted these lights, yet storms could erase all certainty within moments. Shipwrecks were frequent, their remains now discovered by underwater archaeologists who find timbers preserved in cold, oxygen-poor depths. These sunken vessels serve as silent testimony to the fragile boundary between survival and loss. It was within such a storm-lashed world that the Little Mermaid first encountered humanity. The sea above her was no longer a distant surface but a threshold. Waves, governed by lunar cycles, rose and fell with relentless rhythm. Modern science explains these tides through gravitational pull, yet to ancient minds, they were expressions of cosmic will. The moon, pale and constant, drew the ocean upward as if summoning forgotten beings toward the sky. The Little Mermaid observed this world from below, her existence defined by patience and obedience. In folklore, mermaids were often portrayed as temptresses, luring sailors to destruction. Andersen stripped away that cruelty, replacing it with innocence. This transformation was radical for its time. The Sea Maiden became a mirror for human vulnerability, reflecting the cost of love unreturned and faith unfulfilled. As the story unfolded, transformation demanded sacrifice. Ancient myths often portray metamorphosis as punishment or reward, but here it was an act of devotion. To leave the sea meant abandoning not only physical form but voice itself. Sound travels differently underwater, carried farther and faster than in air. Marine scientists now understand how whales communicate across vast distances through low-frequency calls. By surrendering her voice, the Little Mermaid relinquished not just speech, but identity, memory, and power. Silence became the price of ascent. This motif echoes older legends where speech binds magic. In many cultures, names and voices hold essence. To lose them is to become unseen. Andersen's readers, living in an age when social status and expression determined survival, understood this deeply. Silence was not peace. It was erasure. Thus, the Little Mermaid's journey began not with triumph, but with quiet resolve. Beneath the surface of a simple fairy tale stirred centuries of belief, fear, and longing. The sea closed above her world, vast and indifferent, as she moved toward a destiny shaped by love, pain, and the ancient human hunger to belong beyond one's birth. The boundary between sea and shore was not merely a line of foam and sand. It was a divide shaped by nature itself, governed by laws older than memory. As the Little Mermaid rose from the depths, the pressure of the water eased, light sharpened, and the soundscape of the ocean faded into a thinner, harsher silence. Modern science would later explain how human ears evolved for air, not water, and how the change between these realms can disorient even the strongest swimmer. In the language of myth, this crossing was more profound. It marked the passage from permanence into fragility. The potion that enabled her transformation worked with a terrible precision. Her tail dissolved into legs with pain likened not to a wound, but to a blade cutting at every step. Such imagery reflected the medical understanding of Andersen's era, when surgery was often performed without anesthesia and suffering was believed to ennoble the spirit. Each movement upon land reminded her that transformation was never free. In ancient traditions across Europe, initiations required endurance, walking barefoot across stone, fasting, or remaining silent for days. The Little Mermaid's suffering echoed these rites, her body bearing the cost of rebirth. Upon the shore, the human world revealed itself not as a dream, but as a place of constant motion and uncertainty. Coastal settlements of the 19th century were shaped by trade and tides alike. Stone castles rose near harbors, their walls built from limestone quarried inland, their towers serving both defense and navigation. Archaeological studies of Scandinavian fortifications show how such structures often stood close to dangerous waters, symbols of human defiance against nature's vastness. It was in such a setting that the prince lived, unaware of the silent presence drawn to him by fate. The Little Mermaid's devotion was absolute, yet invisible. Deprived of voice, she existed at the margins of human perception. Silence altered her role in the story, shifting her from actor to observer. In literature, silence often signifies virtue or submission, but here it also signified loss. Without speech, her inner world remained locked away. Andersen, influenced by Romantic literature, understood the tragedy of unspoken feeling. The era prized emotional depth, yet social structures often denied expression to those without status or power. The Little Mermaid embodied this contradiction. Days passed beneath the same sky that sailors once read like scripture. Clouds moved with prevailing winds from the Atlantic, their patterns shaped by atmospheric circulation unknown in Andersen's time, but deeply felt by those who lived close to the sea. The prince, bound to his world of ceremony and expectation, perceived kindness without comprehension. Gratitude replaced recognition, and memory blurred into assumption. The one who saved his life became a distant figure, reconstructed by his own longing rather than truth. In ancient myth, recognition often seals destiny. Odysseus was known by scars, kings by lineage, gods by signs in the heavens. Here, recognition failed. The Little Mermaid's sacrifice, immense and irreversible, went unnamed. This absence marked a turning point. Love, in this story, did not conquer all. It remained bound by chance, misunderstanding, and the limits of perception. The sea, meanwhile, did not forget her absence. Below the waves, her sisters felt the imbalance. Folklore from Nordic regions often portrays the sea as a familial entity, its inhabitants bound by blood and obligation. The mermaid's world was governed by cycles as precise as tides. Lunar rhythms guided spawning, migration, and the glowing of bioluminescent life in the depths. Modern marine biology confirms such cycles, revealing how moonlight affects coral spawning and fish behavior. Andersen's intuition aligned with nature's hidden order. When the prince's destiny turned toward another, the weight of finality settled upon the Little Mermaid's path. Marriage in 19th-century Europe was not merely personal. It was political, economic, and dynastic. Royal unions secured alliances and stability. Love, though celebrated in poetry, often bent beneath duty. This reality sharpened the tragedy. The Little Mermaid's hope, sustained through pain and silence, dissolved into certainty. The ancient law of her kind now rose like an unseen tide. Without reciprocation, her borrowed form would fade. At dawn, she would dissolve into sea foam, returning to the elements without memory or soul. Such an ending reflected older beliefs about death before the promise of salvation, when existence simply ceased. In pre-Christian Northern cosmology, not all beings entered an afterlife. Some vanished into nature itself, their essence dispersed among wind and wave. Her sisters, driven by desperation, turned to forbidden knowledge. Across cultures, magic born of sacrifice often carries grave cost. To save her, they surrendered their own beauty, trading their flowing hair to the sea witch for a blade forged from sorrow. Archaeologists have uncovered ritual knives in Scandinavian bogs, offerings to unseen powers, their iron preserved by peat for centuries. These artifacts speak of a time when metal itself was believed to carry intent. The knife given to the Little Mermaid bore such weight. It offered survival through violence, a return to the sea through blood. Yet the choice demanded by the blade was incompatible with her nature. Throughout myth, true transformation requires alignment between desire and action. To kill for love would fracture the very soul she sought to gain. Standing at the threshold of dawn, she faced a paradox older than philosophy: existence at the cost of innocence or oblivion with integrity. As the sky lightened, colors emerged that painters of the Romantic era tried desperately to capture. The horizon blushed with pale gold and rose, wavelengths of light scattering through the atmosphere as the sun climbed higher. This daily miracle, explained today through physics, once carried deep symbolic meaning. Dawn was rebirth, judgment, and revelation. For the Little Mermaid, it marked release. She cast the blade into the sea. The water accepted it without sound. In that moment, her choice severed the last tether to human life. The pain that had accompanied every step faded, replaced by a dissolving sensation as if her body remembered its origin. She leapt from the ship into the waves, not in despair, but in surrender. The sea did not claim her as it claimed wrecks and corpses. Instead, her form transformed once more. She became foam, mist, and breath, scattered across the surface where sunlight met water. Ancient sailors believed the sea exhaled spirits in such moments, white crests breaking like whispered names. Science would later describe evaporation and aerosol spray, yet the image remains hauntingly poetic. In this dissolution, the story refused a simple ending. Oblivion was not absolute. From the remnants of her being arose a new state, one not bound to sea or land. The daughters of the air, spirits without bodies, moved through the world unseen, influencing breeze and cloud. This concept echoed ancient beliefs in elemental beings present in Greek, Celtic, and Arabic traditions where air symbolized transition and impermanence. Through selfless choice, the Little Mermaid entered this liminal existence. Her reward was not love returned, but time. 300 years of gentle service could earn what she sought, an immortal soul. The story thus shifted from romance to moral cosmology. Redemption lay not in possession, but in patience. Here, Andersen's worldview emerged fully. Shaped by Christian ethics and romantic idealism, he framed suffering as a path toward spiritual ascent. Yet he did so without triumphal certainty. The ending remained quiet, unresolved, like mist at sunrise. The sea rolled on beneath the sky, indifferent yet eternal. Ships continued to cross its surface, guided by stars whose light had traveled millions of years to reach human eyes. Below, depths remained unexplored, trenches darker than night. Above, the air carried whispers of transformation. Between them lingered the memory of a silent figure who chose compassion over survival, and in doing so, reshaped an ancient myth into a meditation on sacrifice that still drifts through time. In the centuries that followed her transformation, the Little Mermaid's presence became as subtle as the breath of dawn. No longer bound to flesh or fin, she moved with the currents of the upper world, drifting through spaces where wind met water and clouds gathered their silent weight. The daughters of the air were not beings of power or command. They influenced the world gently, bending nothing, forcing nothing, existing only as witnesses and caretakers of balance. Their labor was invisible, yet constant, like the slow erosion that shapes stone cliffs or the patient accumulation of coral over generations. Across ancient belief systems, air has always represented the realm between worlds. It is unseen, yet essential, intangible, yet powerful. Philosophers of antiquity described it as the medium of spirit, the carrier of thought and soul. In this final state, the Little Mermaid entered a tradition far older than any written page. She became part of the element that touches all life equally, from the smallest shorebird skimming the waves to the tallest mast rising from a ship's deck. Below her, the sea continued its eternal rhythms. Ocean currents, now mapped by satellites and deep-sea probes, follow pathways driven by temperature, salinity, and the slow rotation of the Earth. The North Atlantic drift carries warmth toward Europe, softening climates and shaping civilizations. Long before such knowledge existed, coastal peoples sensed these patterns intuitively. They understood that the sea gave and took according to laws beyond human will. Andersen's ocean reflects this understanding. It is not cruel but impartial, not kind but enduring. The Little Mermaid's former world beneath the waves remained unchanged by her absence. Coral grew, fish migrated, and light faded into darkness with depth. Marine archaeologists studying ancient shipwrecks often remark on how quickly the sea reclaims human traces, turning wood to reef and iron to rusted memory. In the same way, the merfolk realm absorbed loss without ceremony. Time underwater moves differently, measured in currents and cycles rather than years. Her story became part of the sea's quiet archive, held without judgment. Above, the human world moved forward, unaware. Kingdoms rose and fell. Ships evolved from sail to steam. Navigation shifted from stars to instruments, yet the heavens remained constant. Constellations named by ancient astronomers still traced familiar patterns across the night sky. Orion hunted eternally, Ursa Major circled the pole, and the moon continued to command the tides. These cosmic rhythms framed human history with indifference and precision. Against such vastness, individual longing seemed small, yet stories preserved its meaning. It is through story that the Little Mermaid endured. Andersen's tale did not fade after publication. It traveled, translated into languages shaped by different histories and beliefs. Scholars noted its departure from traditional folk narratives. Rather than restoring order through marriage or triumph, it embraced ambiguity. Happiness was deferred, promised only through moral endurance. This structure reflected a broader 19th-century literary movement that questioned simple resolutions and explored inner suffering as a form of truth. The story also preserved older echoes. The idea that selfless acts accumulate spiritual worth appears across cultures, from ancient philosophy to sacred literature. Without naming or challenging any living faith, the tale gestures toward a universal moral intuition that compassion has consequence beyond immediate reward. The Little Mermaid's choice resonated because it aligned with this deep-rooted human understanding. In time, adaptation softened the edges of the narrative. Pain was reduced, endings brightened, and silence replaced by song. Yet beneath every retelling, the original shape remains discernible, like a fossil beneath layers of stone. Literary historians often return to Andersen's text to examine its quiet defiance of expectation. It is a story that refuses to flatter. It insists that love may go unseen, that sacrifice may remain unrecognized, and that meaning may unfold beyond a single lifetime. From an archaeological perspective, coastal folklore has always served as a repository of lived experience. Myths preserved knowledge of dangerous currents, treacherous reefs, and the unpredictability of storms. Mermaids, sirens, and sea spirits were not mere fantasies. They were symbolic warnings shaped by generations who lived at the ocean's edge. The Little Mermaid belongs to this lineage, transformed by literary intent but rooted in collective memory. Her final form, dispersed yet persistent, mirrors the way stories themselves travel. They dissolve into cultures, languages, and imaginations, reforming with each telling. No single version remains complete, yet the essence survives. The Little Mermaid is not confined to page or illustration. She exists wherever sacrifice is chosen over survival, wherever silence bears witness to love unreturned, wherever patience is held as a virtue rather than a weakness. In the natural world, air carries sound farther at night when temperatures shift and layers of atmosphere bend waves of vibration. Ancient peoples noticed how whispers traveled differently at dusk, how voices seemed closer beneath stars. The daughters of the air, moving unseen, belonged to these liminal hours. The Little Mermaid's service unfolded not in spectacle, but in such quiet moments, cooling a fevered breeze, lifting a cloud from heavy rain, softening the passage between day and night. 300 years is a vast span in human terms, yet brief against geological time. Mountains rise and erode over millions of years. Oceans open and close with the slow drift of continents. Even stars are born and die across epochs beyond comprehension. Andersen placed his character within this broader scale, reminding readers that individual striving gains meaning when set against endurance rather than immediacy. When the time of her service would finally reach completion, the story offers no detailed vision of what follows. This absence is deliberate. The promise of an immortal soul is left undefined, preserving mystery. In this restraint lies the tale's lasting power. It does not dictate belief, it invites reflection. It honors the sacred without naming it, allowing the listener to dwell in contemplation rather than conclusion. Thus, the Little Mermaid's journey ends not with closure, but with continuation. The sea still breathes. The air still moves. Stories still pass from voice to page, from page to memory. In the hush between waves and wind, her presence lingers, not as tragedy alone, but as testament. If these ancient voices touch your heart today, please consider subscribing to Ancient Epics and ringing the bell so you never miss the next forgotten tale. Thanks for watching.